What happens when America's most seasoned political journalist goes head-to-head with one of the world's most controversial royal figures? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle sits down with George Stephanopoulos on Good Morning America, promising to set the record straight once and for all. What starts as a promotional appearance for her latest venture quickly spirals into television history's most explosive morning show meltdown. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. The tension in the Good Morning America studio was palpable from the moment Meghan Markle stepped onto the set. Studio executives had been buzzing for weeks about this exclusive interview, billed as her most candid conversation yet about her new lifestyle brand and upcoming projects. But seasoned viewers of George Stephanopoulos knew that look in his eyes, the same steely determination that had made him a formidable White House correspondent and political interviewer for decades. This wasn't going to be the softball promotional chat Meghan's team had negotiated. As the cameras rolled live across America, George leaned forward in his chair, his trademark intensity already evident in his posture. "Meghan, welcome back to Good Morning America. It's been quite some time since we've had the chance to speak with you directly." His voice carried that familiar gravitas that had intimidated politicians and celebrities alike for years. Meghan smiled her practiced media smile, but those watching closely could see the slight tightness around her eyes. She sensed this wasn't going to go according to her carefully crafted talking points. "Thank you for having me, George. I'm excited to share what I've been working on," she replied, her voice carrying that rehearsed warmth that had become her signature in media appearances. But George wasn't interested in pleasantries. He shuffled his papers with deliberate precision, a move that regular viewers recognized as his signal that the gloves were about to come off. "Before we get to your business ventures, I think our viewers deserve some clarity on several issues that have been making headlines." George's tone shifted imperceptibly, but the change was unmistakable to anyone familiar with his interviewing style. "There have been ongoing questions about your relationship with your father, Thomas Markle, who continues to give interviews claiming you've completely cut him out of your life. He's made some pretty serious allegations about your character. How do you respond to that?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's media-trained composure flickered for just a moment before she recovered. "George, I think it's really important that we focus on moving forward rather than relitigating the past. My family situation is complicated, and I've always tried to handle it with as much grace as possible." Her answer was textbook media training: deflect, pivot, stay positive. But George Stephanopoulos hadn't built his reputation by accepting non-answers. "That's not really an answer, though, is it?" George pressed, his voice taking on that prosecutorial edge that had made him famous. "Your father claims you've refused all attempts at reconciliation, that you've cut him off completely despite his health issues. He says the Meghan he raised would never abandon family like this. These aren't abstract allegations. This is your father, publicly pleading for contact with his daughter and his grandchildren. Don't you think our viewers deserve a direct response?" The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. This was clearly not the direction Meghan had expected the interview to take. Her publicist, visible in the wings, was making subtle hand gestures, but George's line of questioning had already gained momentum like a freight train. Meghan's smile became more strained, and her voice carried a slight edge when she responded. "George, with all due respect, you don't know the full situation. There are complexities in family relationships that aren't appropriate to discuss in a public forum like this. I've always maintained that privacy is important, especially when it comes to protecting my children." She was trying to regain control of the narrative, but George sensed weakness and pressed forward like the experienced interrogator he was. "But privacy becomes a luxury when you're consistently putting yourself in the public eye, doesn't it?" George countered, his tone becoming more pointed. "You and Harry have signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify. You've given tell-all interviews. You've written books. You're here promoting another business venture. You can't selectively choose privacy only when the questions become uncomfortable." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Meghan's carefully maintained composure was beginning to crack, and viewers across America could sense that something significant was building. Her voice carried a harder edge when she replied, "I think there's a difference between sharing our truth and our story, and being forced to discuss private family matters that could hurt people I care about." "Your truth?" George seized on the phrase immediately, his journalistic instincts kicking into high gear. "That's an interesting way to put it, because when you sat down with Oprah, you made some pretty explosive claims about the royal family. Claims about conversations regarding your son's skin color. Claims about being denied mental health support. Claims about your wedding. But subsequent reporting has raised questions about the accuracy of some of those statements. Are you saying there's your truth, and then there's the actual truth?" The challenge was unmistakable now. George had just questioned the cornerstone of Meghan's public narrative, her Oprah interview that had sent shockwaves around the world and permanently damaged her relationship with the royal family. The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras capturing every micro-expression on Meghan's face. This was the moment where the interview could go in several directions, and everyone present could feel the electricity in the air. Meghan's jaw tightened visibly. "George, I stand by everything I said in that interview. When you're living through trauma, when you're experiencing racism and being denied help, when you're struggling with mental health, that is your truth. That is your reality. And I won't sit here and allow you or anyone else to gaslight me about my own experiences." The word gaslight seemed to electrify the studio. George's eyebrows raised slightly, a telltale sign that he was about to escalate further. "That's a very serious accusation, Meghan. You're suggesting that questioning inconsistencies in public statements is gaslighting, because there are documented inconsistencies. For instance, you claimed you were married 3 days before the public ceremony, but the Archbishop of Canterbury later clarified that what occurred was simply a personal exchange of vows, not a legal marriage. You claimed you had no knowledge of Harry before meeting him, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. These aren't attacks on your character. These are questions about factual accuracy." The confrontation was building to a crescendo that neither party seemed able to control now. Meghan's voice rose slightly, her carefully maintained media persona beginning to slip away entirely. "So now you're calling me a liar? Is that what this is about? You brought me here under the pretense of discussing my work, my projects, the positive things I'm trying to accomplish, and instead you're conducting some sort of inquisition based on tabloid reporting and unnamed sources?" George leaned back slightly, but his expression remained impassive and determined. "I'm asking the questions that our viewers want answered, Meghan, and I think they deserve honest, direct responses, rather than deflections and accusations of gaslighting." The battle lines were now clearly drawn, and everyone in the studio could sense that this confrontation was about to reach a point of no return. The silence that followed was deafening. Meghan's eyes flashed with something between anger and desperation, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there before. "You know what, George? This is exactly the kind of treatment that drove me away from the royal family in the first place. This relentless, hostile interrogation disguised as journalism. I came here in good faith to discuss my work, and instead you're treating me like I'm some criminal on trial." George's response was measured but cutting. "The difference is, Meghan, that criminals don't voluntarily put themselves on television to promote their brands. You're here because you have something to sell, something to promote. And when you use a platform to profit from your story, that story becomes fair game for scrutiny." His words hit their target with surgical precision, and the color drained slightly from Meghan's face. "Profit from my story." Meghan's voice rose another octave, her composure now hanging by a thread. "You think I profited from sharing the trauma of being suicidal? From revealing the racism I experienced? From talking about how isolated and alone I felt? That's not profit, George. That's survival. That's speaking truth to power." The mention of her suicidal thoughts seemed to shift something in the studio atmosphere, but George pressed forward without missing a beat. And yet every revelation, every interview, every truth-telling moment seems to coincide with a major business announcement or media deal. The Oprah interview happened right as your Netflix deal was being finalized. Today you're here during the launch of your new brand. Are you telling me that's just coincidence? Meghan's hands were visibly trembling now, though whether from anger or something else was unclear. How dare you suggest that I would weaponize my mental health struggles for business purposes? How dare you imply that my pain was calculated? You have no idea what I went through, what my family went through, and you sit here in your privileged position making accusations that are not only false but deeply harmful. Then, help me understand, George shot back, his voice taking on that razor-sharp quality that had made him legendary in political circles. Help our viewers understand why every single public appearance you make seems designed to generate maximum controversy and sympathy, while simultaneously launching another revenue stream. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a very calculated media strategy. The accusation hung in the air like a smoking gun. Meghan's publicist was now frantically trying to get the attention of the show's producers, but the cameras kept rolling and George showed no signs of backing down. The veteran journalist had clearly decided that this was his moment to ask the questions that others had been afraid to voice directly to Meghan's face. "That is absolutely disgusting," Meghan hissed, her media training completely abandoned now. "You're essentially accusing me of faking mental health issues for money. You're suggesting that everything I've been through was some sort of elaborate performance. That's not journalism, George. That's character assassination. And it's exactly the kind of toxic behavior that I've been trying to expose." George leaned forward again, sensing that he had pushed his guest to a breaking point but showing no intention of retreating. "I'm not suggesting you faked anything, Meghan. I'm questioning the timing, the presentation, and the commercial aspects of how you've chosen to share your experiences. There's a difference between speaking your truth and packaging your truth for maximum impact and profit." "Package my truth?" Meghan's voice was now clearly strained with emotion. "Listen to yourself. Listen to how you're talking to a woman who has been through trauma, who has experienced racism, who has struggled with mental health. This is exactly what I meant when I talked about the institution protecting itself by attacking the messenger. You're doing their work for them right now." The reference to the institution, clearly meaning the royal family, seemed to trigger something even deeper in George's questioning. "Since you brought up the royal family, let's talk about that. You've made numerous allegations against them, but you've consistently refused to provide specifics or evidence. You've implied racist conversations, but won't name names. You've claimed institutional cruelty, but won't cite specific instances. How is the public supposed to evaluate these serious accusations when you won't provide details?" Meghan's eyes blazed with fury. "I won't name names because I'm not trying to destroy people, George. I'm trying to create change, but apparently that concept is foreign to you. Apparently, the only way you can understand someone speaking out against systemic racism and institutional cruelty is if they provide you with a neat little package of evidence that you can pick apart and discredit." "That's called accountability, Meghan," George replied coldly. "When you make serious public accusations against one of the world's most respected institutions, when you claim racism and cruelty, people have a right to ask for specifics. They have a right to evaluate the claims independently rather than just taking your word for it." The confrontation had now reached a fever pitch that neither participant seemed able to control. Meghan was visibly shaking. Whether from anger, hurt, or both was unclear. Her voice cracked slightly when she responded. "You know what the really sick part about this is, George? You're sitting here defending an institution that has centuries of colonial oppression and racism in its history. You're more concerned about protecting their reputation than you are about the lived experience of a biracial woman who was trying to serve that institution faithfully." George's expression hardened even further. "I'm not defending anyone, Meghan. I'm doing journalism. I'm asking the questions that serious journalists ask when public figures make serious public claims. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, then perhaps you shouldn't be making those claims in the first place." The words hit Meghan like a physical blow. She sat back in her chair, her breathing clearly visible now, her composure completely shattered. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper but carried a venom that could be felt throughout the studio. "If I can't handle scrutiny? George, I've been handling scrutiny and attacks and character assassination for years now. What I can't handle is being treated like a liar and a fraud by someone who is supposed to be a professional journalist." "Then stop acting like you're above accountability. George fired back immediately, his own composure finally showing cracks. Stop playing the victim every time someone asks you to back up your claims with facts. Stop hiding behind accusations of racism and sexism every time someone challenges your narrative. If you want to be taken seriously as a public figure, then act like one. The studio fell into a shocked silence. George had just delivered what could only be described as a devastating verbal assault, questioning not just Meghan's credibility but her entire approach to public life. The cameras captured every micro-expression on both their faces, George's stern determination and Meghan's barely contained fury. Everyone present could sense that this confrontation was about to explode into something unprecedented in morning television history, and the tension was so thick it felt like the air itself might ignite at any moment. What happened next would be replayed on social media and news outlets for weeks to come. Meghan's face contorted with a rage that seemed to consume her entire being. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and dangerous, carrying a fury that made everyone in the studio instinctively lean back. How dare you tell me to act like a public figure when you're sitting there acting like a tabloid hack instead of the journalist you claim to be? George's eyes narrowed to slits. Excuse me? You heard me perfectly, Meghan snapped, her voice rising with each word. This isn't journalism, George. This is a hit job. This is you doing the royal family's dirty work for them because apparently they don't even need to attack me anymore. They can just sit back and let American journalists do it for them. Congratulations, you've become their mouthpiece. The accusation of being a royal mouthpiece seemed to strike George at his core. His face flushed slightly, and his voice took on a tone that veteran political figures would recognize as dangerous. Are you suggesting that I'm somehow compromised? That my questions aren't legitimate? Because let me tell you something, Meghan. I've been asking tough questions of powerful people since before you were even thinking about public life. Oh, so now you're pulling rank? Meghan laughed bitterly. The seasoned white male journalist putting the uppity woman of color in her place. This is rich, George. This is exactly the kind of systemic behavior I've been talking about. And you're demonstrating it perfectly, right here on live television. The racial element being explicitly introduced into their confrontation sent shockwaves through the studio. George's face went rigid with what appeared to be barely controlled anger. Don't you dare turn this into something about race when it's about accountability. Don't you dare hide behind identity politics when you're being asked legitimate questions about your public statements. Identity politics? Meghan's voice reached a pitch that made several crew members wince. My lived experience of racism isn't identity politics, George. It's reality. But apparently, reality is something you're not interested in when it doesn't fit your narrative of discrediting everything I say. George slammed his papers down on the desk with a force that echoed through the studio. Your reality seems to change depending on what's convenient for your current media appearance. First, you barely knew anything about Harry or the royal family. Then suddenly, you're an expert on institutional racism within the monarchy. First, you're grateful for the opportunities they gave you. Then, they're destroying your mental health. Which version of reality should we believe, Meghan? The question hit like a bomb. Meghan's face went white, then red, then white again. When she spoke, her voice was shaking with emotion. You know what, George? I'm done. I'm done with this ambush interview. I'm done with your condescending questions. I'm done with being treated like I'm some sort of con artist, instead of a woman who tried to serve an institution faithfully and was destroyed for it. Then leave, George said coldly, his voice cutting through the studio like ice. If you can't handle being asked direct questions about your public statements, then walk away. But don't expect the American people to keep buying your victim narrative when you run away every time someone challenges it. The words seemed to physically stagger Meghan. She stared at George for a long moment, her breathing audible in the sudden silence. Then something shifted in her expression, a kind of cold fury that was somehow more frightening than her earlier emotional outbursts. You want me to leave? Fine, I'll leave. But let me tell you something first, George Stephanopoulos. She stood up slowly, removing her microphone with deliberate precision. You think you've accomplished something here today? You think you've exposed me somehow? All you've done is prove every single point I've ever made about how women, particularly women of color, are treated when they dare to speak truth to power. You've shown America exactly what I've been talking about." George remained seated, his expression impassive. "What you've shown America is what happens when someone can't substantiate their claims under basic journalistic scrutiny." Meghan's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Basic journalistic scrutiny? Is that what you call this character assassination? This is exactly why people don't trust the media anymore, George. Because you've forgotten the difference between holding people accountable and tearing them down for entertainment." She began walking toward the studio exit, but turned back one final time, her voice carrying clearly through the silent studio. "You know what the saddest part about this is? I actually respected you once. I thought you were different from the rest of them. But you're not. You're just another man in a position of power who can't stand it when a woman refuses to be silenced." George finally stood up, his voice following her as she walked away. "And you're just another celebrity who thinks their fame makes them immune to legitimate questions." Meghan stopped dead in her tracks. The entire studio held its breath as she slowly turned around, her face a mask of cold fury. "Celebrity? That's what you think this is about? Fame?" Her voice was deadly quiet now. "George, I gave up my career, my country, my family, everything I knew to try to serve something bigger than myself. And when that institution failed me, when it threw me to the wolves, I spoke out. Not for fame, not for money, but because staying silent would have killed me. Then why are you here promoting your brand instead of working quietly for the causes you claim to care about?" George shot back, his own composure finally cracking completely. "Why is every interview, every appearance, every truth-telling moment tied to some commercial venture?" The question seemed to drain something fundamental out of Meghan. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was tired and broken. "Because I have to survive, George. Because when you're cut off from everything you once knew, when you're facing legal bills and security costs and trying to build a life from scratch, you find a way to make it work. But apparently, that makes me a grifter in your eyes." She shook her head sadly. "You know what? I'm not angry at you anymore, George. I actually feel sorry for you. Because someday you're going to realize that you had a chance to have a real conversation about real issues that matter, and instead you chose to tear down someone who was trying to make a difference." With that, she turned and walked toward the studio exit. But George wasn't finished. "The only difference you've made is creating more division and controversy wherever you go," he called after her. Meghan stopped at the studio door and looked back one final time. "And the only thing you've accomplished today is proving that some people would rather attack the messenger than deal with the message. Goodbye, George. I hope this was worth it for your ratings." The heavy studio door closed behind her with a finality that seemed to echo through the entire building. George stood alone in the studio, breathing heavily, as the cameras continued rolling and captured his face, a mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been regret. The crew remained frozen, unsure whether to cut the feed or keep rolling on what was clearly television history in the making. After what felt like an eternity, George looked directly into the camera, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of something indefinable. "We'll be right back after this commercial break." As the studio lights dimmed and the familiar GMA theme music began to play, America was left to process what they had just witnessed, a confrontation that would be analyzed, debated, and replayed for months to come, marking the moment when morning television crossed a line that could never be uncrossed.